morning, everybody, and welcome to this panel, this NukeSuite panel about the London tech ecosystem. I am Julien Oudart. I am based in Los Angeles. I'm an entrepreneur, but I've also been spending a number of years in London a while back. So today we're going to speak about the London tech scene, and at NukeSuite we thought it made very much sense because we have a growing number of US startups that are into the program that are expanding to Europe. And on the other side, you also have a number of European startups applying to the NukeSuite program every year. So hence this panel that we're going to discuss today. To do so, I have with me three experts, three people that have been in the UK for a very long time, so that know the ecosystem very well. They've all created, funded, existed startups in the UK. I have with me Marie-Barbe, Damian, and Saurav. And of course, I will give you a few minutes to introduce yourself. Maybe Marie-Barbe, if you want to start.
Sure. So I'm Marie-Barbe. I'm French, been living in London for nearly 20 years now. My first job was to reform the French government, which I pretty much failed at. No, I did try, and we had some good time, but I think this process is ongoing. So I worked in the public sector for nearly 10 years, working for ministers and politicians in France. And then I came to London and worked for different mayors of London. And then I decided to switch to entrepreneurship and co-founded a company called Shopcade, which was in the media commerce business, which we sold to a French media group called Lagardere back in 2017. Stayed within the group for a good 2 years and then exited. And since then I've been, so I did, because of this dual experience in public sector and in Gov and Tech, I did a whole report on GovTech in France for President Macron. And then I'm working with different startups, especially two startups at the moment, one in EdTech called World is a Village, and another who's a platform to help media producers bring the content online, which is called InPlayer.
Thank you. Damian?
Hi everyone, I'm Damian. I am Chief Commercial Officer at Founders Factory, and Founders Factory is an investment and operating company which is backed by large corporates, and the intention of the Founders Factory vehicle, or Founders Factory as a company, is to do two things. Firstly, is to help large corporates like Reckitt Benckiser, Johnson & Johnson, AB InBev, etc., to understand disruptive threats and emerging technologies and consumer demands when they're on the horizon, and so that they can better deal with them when they're at the front door. And the second thing, probably the more important thing, is to provide huge value to early stage tech founders as they go from huge ambiguity to slightly less ambiguity. Prior to doing that, so I've been doing that for about a year and a half. Prior to doing that, my career was spent in marketing services and the intersection of technology. So I set up and ran a ad tech business in 2008, which I ran for 10 years, leading that through to acquisition. And then I've launched a couple of businesses outside of that before joining Founders Factory.
Thank you, Damian. Saurav?
Hi everyone, my name is Saurav Chopra. I'm the co-founder and exec chairman of a company called Perkbox. Perkbox is an employee experience platform, the leading employee experience platform in Europe and the UK. We work with over 8,000 companies, small and medium-sized companies to large corporates like Levi Strauss or Whole Foods or Nando's and such. And Perkbox, with Perkbox, I founded and ran Perkbox till a few months ago, and have just recently stepped into an exec chairman role from a CEO role. And we raised over $30 million, primarily from Draper Esprit, and the team grew the team to about 200-ish people, and it's a SaaS business. Prior to Perkbox, I've been involved with a couple of other startups which have exited as a part of their management and growth teams. One was a company called Amobee, which is where I met Julien. We used to work together. That was Sequoia. Accel backed one of the first mobile advertising startups that was bought by Singapore Telecom. And thereafter, a company called Byte Mobile, which was again a Bay Area based mobile network software business that was bought by Citrix. And prior to that, I was with Yahoo. So I have kind of covered the spectrum across, working for digital media companies, being part of the growth and management teams in a startup which has exited, and also founding a company which is doing quite well.
Thanks, Saurav. So when we prepared this panel together, we have a list of questions, and the question I'm going to ask you guys today. But I think it would be great to start with a pretty generic question, and maybe Damian, you can start answering that. What's your general view of the evolution of the London tech ecosystem over the last 5-10 years in terms of areas like has London seen fintech, mobility services, AI scene growing in the city? How do you fund a company? Because globally, the way you can fund a startup these days has nothing to do with what it was 10 years ago. So what's your general point of view on this? And again, I think Damian, you might be willing to start with this.
So my grey hairs will be speaking quite a lot throughout the next 40 minutes, I'm sure. But I remember building Glow, the company that I started in 2008, and there was very, very limited infrastructure for early stage business, so early stage founders. Whenever I would be out on in the centre of London trying to visit clients and partners, for those gaps in between meetings, I would have to try and log on to somebody's free Wi-Fi, and that normally meant that I was spending a disproportionate amount of time in coffee shops and hotel lobbies. And when I would go and talk to early stage investors about the business that I built was a social ad platform connected into Facebook, and I had to sort of educate them on the domain, and then educate them on the all of the idiosyncrasies or nuances of what I was doing. So if we sort of fast forward to now, those conversations, the infrastructure is already laid down. There is quite a mature set of resources and support organizations that service the early stage founder and their teams. And there's also much more knowledge that exists within the funds. So that those sort of education questions, you can just get straight to the sort of point with investors. So those are completely night and day to when I first started out, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. There are sort of corporate backed efforts to support early stage business. There are a lot of the professional services, accountants, lawyers, and so on. They will also have their innovation outreach and actively working with early stage businesses, because obviously they grow into the sort of clients of the future. In terms of co-working, that was not even a word in 2008, I don't think. So there's all of these places that are very tuned into providing the kind of things that we need when we're starting out. I think over and above those relatively obvious changes in the landscape, there's been like this influx of capital over the last couple of years, which is getting, I don't think we're quite at parity, but it is getting the London and the UK and other cities across Europe closer to how early stage investment works in Silicon Valley and places like New York and so on, in that we're not now dealing with fund managers, we're dealing with operators. We're dealing with people that have much higher empathy towards the journey, a much greater understanding of the domain, and you can access very, very smart, impactful money a lot easier than you have ever been able to. And I think that becomes a real sort of force multiplier. It becomes, also with the backdrop of the sort of democratization of venture capital and how there are so many more investors now than there were in any other period in history, probably, means that the barriers to starting a company come down. It's much easier to go from nothing to something than it has ever been.
Okay. So Rav, maybe you have something you wanted to add something.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, I have been lucky to work across both the London kind of European tech ecosystem as well as the Bay Area. So, if you remember, Julien, when we worked with Amobee, that was 2007. That was probably the first kind of tech kind of startup, we worked with. And that was, you had to go to this Regis co-working space all the way in Chiswick. And, if you remember back then, there's probably, I think the ecosystem has evolved so much, as Damian was saying earlier, the seed stage funding, I think SeedCamp may have just started by then, and it's probably the only guys around if they had started. There was, there was really very, very few angels. So the whole funding network, obviously you had the established VCs, but, when it comes to early stage, there was very, very few, institutions, in terms of angels. There probably very few tech exits that happened. So from a people standpoint, you didn't have this network of people, who had exited successfully, which means they had capital to deploy. You didn't have the network of people who were operators who you can get as advisors, who can guide you through the journey, whether it's SaaS or fintech or e-com or whatever. You did not have the people, when it comes to hiring people, finding people. Now you go about hiring people, it's so much easier to find people who have worked in startups. Back then in the day, you had to actually persuade people to move, to take that jump, to take that leap of faith, to take that risk. And that was a lot harder. Now it's a no-brainer, right? And it's easy to find people who have that experience. And also there's a very, very easy, if you, much easier now. People want to go when they come out of universities. They don't want to go to banks or consulting necessarily. They want to go and work, and they want to have an impact. We talk about the future of work. One of the big things around the future of work, which I have seen happen, over the last few years, is around people want to work for mission-driven companies, right? And companies whose values they're aligned with. And what we see now is a lot of people coming out of unis want to make that impact and want to work for a startup that's got a great mission and is changing the world, and whose values are around by their values. So I think it's a huge shift in the whole ecosystem, not just in capital, support infrastructure, co-working or incubators, all of that. More importantly, the people, because ultimately it's a people game, right? So how people think or they can deliver, the kind of people you've got access to, it's changed the game, which is no wonder you see some spaces like fintech, AI, where, UK is so much more advanced than other parts of the world.
Okay. Marie-Barbe, I will also let you answer this question.
Yeah,
I will add one more question to you also, because you work in the public sector. What about public institutions and bodies?
Yeah,
Are they
I was going to say exactly that.
Are they funding companies these days in London?
I was going to say exactly that. I completely agree with what you've said. I mean, there's been a whole culture shift, and I think it happened in the UK a bit earlier than it happened in the rest of mainland Europe. We've seen this shift in France, for example, the last probably couple years, but definitely in the UK, it was pretty early on. The whole economy basically pretty much adapted to the needs of startups, which was great. And I would say even to the point of government, and the UK is leading the way in terms of GovTech, which is basically government working with startups. The UK was leading the way in terms of reducing paperwork. It's super easy to set up a company here in the UK. I've set up subsidiaries in the US. It was a completely different game, and I'm not even talking about France yet. So so definitely there's been a lot of efforts from everyone, including government, to make it easier for startups, and startups, as you said, Saurav, have been a magnet for in terms of recruitment for many years now. I hope it stays the same with everything that we're living through now. But it's definitely been a very supportive ecosystem here in the UK for startups.
Okay, discussing with you guys, I already have some questions coming up. First one, very practical one. If I were a US startup CEO, I want to launch in the UK, where shall I set up my office in London?
You're assuming that you will have an office.
I do have an office. Let's say it's 2019.
How much money have you got? That's probably what every self-respecting landlord would ask.
What were the hot areas pre-COVID, let's say, or and maybe COVID changed things as well. So.
Well, initially, obviously, there was a great density of early stage companies in East London, around Old Street, and and also not just the early stage ventures, but also the support infrastructure, which made it very easy, allowed for serendipity to a larger extent, in the same way that you find whenever you've got a sort of tech cluster anywhere in the world. I think, and that was probably true. There was great density there for a long time. I think that great businesses are now popping up pretty much anywhere. There are choices to be made around access to talent and access to customers and access to capital that really, I think, should drive where companies want to base themselves. But we see, obviously around the sort of the premier universities, all within commuting distance of London, they will all have their sort of highly concentrated tech clusters, which speak to the type of IP that is being created out of those institutions and the type of IP that is available for companies to access. So I've personally always been a fan of West London, and that's purely because of my commuting choices. So I would suggest Chiswick.
So what you're saying is that it's not as identified as it was a few years ago. Now you've got startups, I guess.
I think it used to be very concentrated, and it's kind of pretty much spreading around the whole of London, I'd say. Okay. I don't know if you have the same experience, Saurav, but I've seen startups not just in East London now; they're pretty much everywhere.
I'm a big fan of West London as well, and my co-founder, myself, and our CFO are all West London, and between Hammersmith and Chiswick, and when we set up Perkbox, we had to move Perkbox offices. We had rapid growth, so we had to move every time. Back in the day, and this is pre-COVID, there's no way I could get into West London because half my team actually said to us, if you move to Chiswick or Hammersmith, we'll walk out, because everybody lives in the East. But I think COVID has changed the game completely. I think COVID has changed the game completely because, first of all, people don't want to come to the office anymore, right? So we have just introduced flexible working, which means you can spend half the time in the office, half out, even if you're local, right? And I think what's going to happen is that you will find that for now with the new law, where if I'm involved with a startup or I'm an investor, what I'm seeing is that you could actually, the best thing for you is to take a work with a co-working provider who actually has got different points of presence across London. So you can pop into Borough one day, you can pop into Chiswick, and you kind of get together as teams, but with the flexibility of maybe staying together 3 days a week, which and then the commute doesn't really matter. So you don't want to have a leased space right now unless you're setting up a big office with 100 people or so, right? Or there's no point in having a leased space. You can optimize the space very easily, and it's distributed right now. And that's what COVID has done, in my view, that you can have a team of 10, 20, whatever, work remotely. Some days you're together, some days you're not, and distributed. You can pick the location, really. Sometimes, some of the startups that I'm involved with, sometimes we'll meet in Borough, sometimes we'll meet in Fulham, right? But it's the same co-working network, so the membership becomes easy. That's my view.
Okay. One more thing I think that Damian mentioned is, and that every tech ecosystem is suffering from, is the scarcity maybe of developers and tech resources. Have you seen any initiatives to address this issue in London, or is there any identified large cities in the UK that have been strong in universities where you can source more developers, in Manchester, Liverpool, elsewhere?
There's definitely there's London, obviously, but then you can see Manchester's developing. Oxford, Cambridge are pretty strong. I think there's 10 unicorns between the two of them. because obviously of the presence of universities. You can see Brighton, Bristol. There's a few regional hubs that are emerging. And to be fair, up until very recently, it was, you could get developers from anywhere in the world. You posted a job, you had applications from anywhere in Europe, Commonwealth, and pretty much anywhere in the world. The big question is whether this will dry out a bit with Brexit. I know the government has issued there's a tech visa, which gives you 5 years residency for highly qualified developers. The government is taking action to try and make sure that, you know, we remain a magnet for key, you know, tech talent. But we'll see how this pans out. My experience is that we saw post-Brexit, we saw a little bit of we had less applications from everywhere than previously. We saw the number of candidates for each tech job reduce significantly. I don't know if you guys had the same experience.
Yeah, I think I was going to talk about the sort of those like edge skills, those bleeding edge skills that are coming out of some of the university ecosystems, and just very close to where I am is Imperial College. Some excellent talent comes from there, and great early stage ventures also come out of that organization. And that is true for all of the major universities and colleges. I think that the ability to work with offshore teams or distributed teams, you know, has all. My last company, we had people in all over the world, teams of engineers all over the world, and we chose to do that. We had a core sort of core of people in London, you know, seven or eight people, and then we had 30 people in 2 different offices outside of the UK to augment what we did in centrally. And those models, I think, are quite commonplace now. You know, a lot of the companies that I personally work with will not, you know, have never had this, you know, they've never had the sort of engineering teams in the same place as the commercial teams. And that feels like it's quite standard.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, you know, in the past, pre-COVID, some of the challenges we saw, you know, at Perkbox was obviously big. You know, engineering talent is pretty short, and again, like we're not necessarily. You know, I'm not necessarily just talking about the bleeding edge, even across the board in terms of like, you know, full stack, getting great full stack engineers, always very, very high demand. If they're, which means 2 things. A, cost is very, very high, and the cost really ramped up pretty dramatically for high quality engineering talent. Costs very, very high in the UK. And then obviously there's so much demand that, you know, staff retention becomes pretty challenging when there's so much demand for very, very high quality engineering. So those are the 2 problems that was really affecting us at Perkbox. When we were ramping up engineering talent, we had at one point recruited about 45 engineers in like 3 to 4 months, and it was just bonkers, you know, in terms of the cost impact and how we had to double down to get these guys in. I think what has changed is that this whole hybrid model that Damian was referring to, which is, you know, having a part of your team elsewhere. These could be core members of your team. So, you know, that changed a lot. And I think with COVID has accelerated a lot, actually. So it's both like members of your team, which is like, you know, now we have a Perkbox, we've got guys in, you know, Spain, Italy. I don't even know where some of them are now. It's only when I'm on the call, I found out, oh, actually, are you based here? So, you know, so that's changed a lot, and they're full-time members of your team. They can be based anywhere. And I think what people have realized is that, especially founders and management team, is that actually when people are remote, that doesn't mean they're less efficient, right? Which is always a bias in people's heads. Oh, you need to be together to be more efficient. I think that has changed a lot. So now you're finding engineers who are in your team can be really based anywhere. And then there's a staff augmentation model, right? Where you've got companies who are pretty much saying, hey, we can give you 5 engineers. They will work as a part of your team. They'll still be on their books. And that staff augmentation businesses we're working with a staff augmentation business we have our own engineers who are based in, Spain, Italy, and a few other places, but we're also working with a staff augmentation company, which we started off with 4 engineers. Now they're 8. They're based in Romania, doing a really good job. So I think there's some new models coming in that COVID has really accelerated. And that is kind of, helping provide a hedge against the massive cost battle a lot of startups have for very high quality engineering talent. Obviously, there's things which are, bleeding edge engineering, which may be in the areas of AI, where there's certainly university clusters where it's still very, very UK specific. But I think for some of the other areas, there are more options now for startups to, access more resources outside the UK and use a hybrid team model.
Okay. Could you, the 3 of you, maybe highlight 1 or 2 startup success stories, or in specifically maybe in those areas where London is very strong, like fintech, mobility, AI? Any startup that comes to mind?
TransferWise is one of the big UK startups which has gone global. It started in the UK. It was set up by 2 Estonians, I think, but started in the UK, and then I think they're quite big, and they've moved their headquarters to mainland Europe, I think, post-Brexit, and they're very big in Europe, and about a quarter of their business is in the US, I think, today. That's definitely one of the big success stories here in the UK, but there's others, including Perkbox.
Oh, thank you. I think fintech, obviously, UK is a big, right, very, very successful. I think you got TransferWise, as you mentioned, Revolut.
Oh, Revolut.
Yeah, there are just so many great examples. I think UK has, because of, the way our financial services operate here, because inherently they had to be global. I think they're doing some great success stories. I think AI, obviously, another area that, I think UK is kind of leading the charge. DeepMind, Google's AI entity is most of what I understand, Google's top of the line AI research happens through, DeepMind, which is London based. And, obviously they're doing some great projects on the NHS side, the health side, which can really help us hopefully cure a lot more diseases faster. I think that's an example I would give.
Yeah, Damian.
Yeah, I was going to, there are so many to name at the sort of later stage. I think at the very early stage, working with a bunch of really interesting businesses at the moment. There's a company called Pettone, which is in a similar vein to DeepMind. They're using, they're helping drug companies make better discoveries or faster discoveries. There's a company called Welder, which is a very kind of secure Slack for regulated industries. So for any company that shares sensitive information, or where that information is regulated by external companies, you can't use WhatsApp, Slack, etc. So people are using Welder, fantastic founder of that company. In addition, there's a company called Acre, which we built and spun out last year. They've raised, I think, 9 million at seed, so they're really off to the races. Have big partnerships with some large blue chip companies. They're all about providing the sort of workflow tools to the mortgage industry. Some really sort of deep IP being built across a number of these interesting businesses.
Okay, so we to our next question. I think it also would be interesting to again speak about the impact of COVID. Obviously, it's been a year now. It has changed many things in the way companies work. I mean, both corporate and startups. Any thoughts, any comments on how it has impacted the last year and the impact it will have on the future in terms of how people will get organized, but also the kind of new businesses it can create?
So I think that this is firstly a really interesting time to build a company, as we are at the bottom of a market correction, or at the bottom of a cycle. So I think that there's a lot of people that are interested, either voluntarily choosing entrepreneurship as a path, or having limited other options because of redundancy and so I think that the considerations that I'm talking to early stage founders about at the moment is around some of the basics, like, do you need to have everybody in one place in order to be effective as a company and to achieve what you need to achieve? If no, then what does that mean for how you run your business? There's some of the general management principles that you apply in terms of setting and hitting objectives. Can you look to a truly international talent pool? And if so, what are the regulatory implications and the sort of tax implications of working with people across different jurisdictions? So all of these kind of things is like, people are trying to understand.
Maybe Marie-Barbe or Saurav, anything to add on this?
No, the only thing to add is that startups, obviously they've suffered from COVID just as much as everyone else, but maybe because, we're very agile. For example, I worked, like, World is a Village is a travel tech company, which obviously, for which COVID was a massive disaster. And we pivoted over the course of, a few weeks, and then developed a completely 100% digital offer. And that's the beauty of startups, right? For me, when I look at, some department stores, and I feel for them, because I think it's much harder to pivot when you've got a big established business. For startups, you're agile by definition. So in a way, I think it's there's definitely been some startups which there's been some startups who stopped business because of COVID and all that. There was some news about that, but I think most of them it's probably mostly an opportunity for a new economy and new tools and new platforms and new needs, rather than in the end it will I'm sure the positive will come out of that.
Yeah, I think from my view is that obviously from a negatives, how it's impacted negatively. I think obviously certain sectors have been hugely impacted, and that really has the when it leads to unemployment and what is the disposable income, how people are going to spend money in 2021 is going to be quite interesting as we come out of this. Obviously people have saved a lot of money and not spending on what they normally spend, but at the same time, they're not, a lot of people don't have the incomes, right? So I think that's obviously negative. I think it's had a huge impact obviously on the well-being of people. So well-being is top of mind for companies, for you talked about health and wellness, but employers looking out for the well-being of their employees is absolutely key, because everybody's affected. Previously when HR talked about well-being, it was really an HR subject. It was not something that ever a lot of the CEOs and exec team actually, unfortunately, a lot of CEOs and exec teams paid lip service to it. And now when everybody's in the same boat, right? Everybody's suffering from well-being issues when you're locked in the house and cannot walk out. So I think that's definitely top of mind. And I think, so lots of interest in that space, but companies what's really heartening to see is companies making tangible efforts to improve the well-being of their people. So a lot of the perk box messaging is resonating really well with customers. And, but at the same time, I think from the best tech companies have been formed usually in the worst recessions or the worst dips. You've got Google as a good example, just after the 2001 crash. So I think part of it is that I think you'll see some great companies come out of this. I think part of this is also, I think it's a bit different in that because it's a medical pandemic, when I talk to people, with a lot of young talent, you hear the thing is that, look, we gotta, things are so unpredictable. I better invest my time and my life into something meaningful. So that is actually probably something you hear a lot more, which I think will get people to invest their time and energy more into new ventures, because more into things that they're passionate about, more into things that are aligned with their own value systems, right? So the whole coming back to mission-driven companies, I think the time is, people coming out of unis, people very young who are new to the workforce will be looking for more of that. I think that's probably the positive of this, which is that people are excited about doing something that's a lot more meaningful than just a job,
Which I think is globally good news. We have 5 minutes left. I'm gonna say the word Brexit. So the question I have is, just to wrap up, is when a UK startup want to scale internationally, like what you've seen in the past, they primarily go to the US, or do they go to Europe first? And is there going to be any impact on Brexit? And also for our audience, also in the US, if I was to launch in Europe, the easiest way for me probably was to open an office in London. Do you think it's going to still be true in 5 years with Brexit? And anything you can say about that? I know it's not easy, but any opinion is welcome.
I think all startups sighed a big sigh of relief back a few weeks ago when the trade deal was announced. I think at least we know, the no deal was a big fear, I think, among everyone here, including startups. So at least now we know. We've come out of 4 years, I think, of uncertainty. It was quite challenging. Now we kind of know what the world's going to look like, and I think startups being agile by definition, they'll adapt and they'll find opportunities in any crisis, including Brexit. I think the fintech sector, which was traditionally super strong in the UK, will probably suffer a bit more than others. But again, I'm sure they'll find opportunities in dealing with new regulations, and I think there's going to be opportunities, as in any crisis. When you think of it, the 2008 financial crisis resulted in a big boom for startups. So who knows?
Optimism. Good. I like it. Damian, also you work with corporates that invest into the Founders Factory project. Have you seen any shift here? Any changes?
Not really on that level. I am a hopeless optimist as well, Marie-Barbe. I choose to look at things positively, and I really hope that the next few years we're able to retain the sources of capital and the centers of talent, which are the reasons why companies choose to set up in any one jurisdiction. I really hope that we are able to maintain that. I am. I have some, who knows, the political landscape, but I think in a lot of countries around the world is a little bit, there are no foregone conclusions on what the future will look like based on who is governing. However, I think you've got to remain positive. We're not seeing any different impact in terms of our ability to attract capital into the Founders Factory structure. And indeed, it would be unquestionable to think that there will be a sort of seepage of all of this entrepreneurial activity over a meaningful time frame. I don't think that will come to pass. I just think that our ability to work with, or rather early stage venture, tech ventures' ability to work with customers across borders and to employ staff across borders, those things absolutely must be maintained. And it should be, we should absolutely protect the incentives to allow capital to flow into these businesses. And I think if we can maintain those three elements, then we're in a really good place. And I will remain to be optimistic.
Okay. So Rav, are you going to be optimistic too?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been, I think the UK, at least in the startup world, has that critical mass, which is, significantly more than other European hubs, in my opinion, which will not get disrupted because of Brexit per se. And tying back to your other question around where do UK startups go, I think in my experience, it really depends on the sector you're talking about. It's a much more common for European startups to come to the UK than as their first port of call, than for the UK startups necessarily to go to Europe. And it depends on the sector, right? If you're in software, you're in SaaS or software, you tend to go to the US. If the US market is very crowded, very competitive in your space, you probably end up in other English-like markets like Canada or Australia before you go to Europe. If you're e-com, you tend to go into Europe because US is probably incredibly busy in your space. Fintech is, I think, where the problem may manifest itself with passporting not being allowed, which was previously the case. However, a lot of the fintechs have been preparing for this eventuality in any case, right? They were pretty much aware that passporting is not going to be allowed. So they've been preparing. But for new fintechs, that may create an extra burden if they do want to operate in Europe. And a lot of fintechs now are going to Asia, right? So they're going straight to APAC, setting up Singapore headquarters. So I think I'm very, very hopeful. It will not necessarily have an impact, and it'll just get guys to focus more on, and get out of the UK to US and APAC faster than they would have normally done.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much for your input. I think it was a very rich conversation, and hopefully helpful for our audience in the US and anywhere else. Thanks again, and I think I will wrap up with this panel. See you soon, and all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheerio, as they say.
Yeah.